again, Mark here from Talkingbass. Over the past few years, I've been asked time and time again about short scale basses. The usual conversation involves the initial grievance of bass players with smaller hands struggling to get to grips with the wide frets of the traditional long scale bass. My answer is most often along the lines of, don't worry about it, learn to make use of position shifts and work on adapting to the size by developing your technique. And I still stand by that. I know many bass players with small hands that play great regardless of the scale. However, there is always the option of a small scale bass. So today I'm going to take a look at one of the latest short scale offerings from Sire, the U5. So what's a short scale bass? Well, if you walk into any music store in the world, most basses on display will be long scale. That's the norm. So the scale refers to the distance from the nut to the bridge. Okay, so a long scale bass is measured at 34 inches. A short scale bass is 30 inches or less. So the neck is shorter and the frets are closer together. This also makes for a smaller body too. So short scale basses are great for kids and smaller hands. You'll also find extra long scale basses like some of the Lachlan's and multi-scale basses like Dingwalls that can have a 33 inch on the G string down to 37 on the B string. This is done by using the fanned frets that have become more and more popular in recent years. The reason for this is that given the same gauge of string, let's say 105 on the E string, the longer the scale, the more tension that you'll find in the string. So 5-string basses often suffer from a flappy B string relative to other strings. So to remedy this, you can either use a much heavier gauge or use a longer scale. Multi-scale basses give you the extra tension on those bigger strings without the need for the extra gauge. So back to short scale basses, this shorter scale means you're going to have less tension in those strings. This can be a matter of taste for many. So on the Sire, it is noticeable that the strings are a little more loose. So if I want to bend the strings or add vibrato, it's much easier. Now, if I wanted to remedy that and get some more tension in there, then I'd need to go for heavier gauge strings to match the tension of a regular bass. So the biggest problem that I personally find with short scale basses is that they often look a little weird. So because the bodies are smaller, everything looks a little busy. So the pickups and knobs all tend to look a little cramped on the body, and the conventional body shapes just start looking weird. And they often look quite toy-like the Fender Mustang or the Jackson short scales. Either that, or you have to go for the very traditional looks like the Hofner violin bass or some of the other hollow body offerings. The thing I love about the Sire U5 is it looks really good and doesn't have that toy-like body. Sire basses are created in collaboration with the legendary Marcus Miller and aim to provide great professional grade instruments at a low price point. Sire are very similar to Squire in that they are the main recommendation when buying a first instrument, and I have to say that this Sire is a great bass for the price. This is around £400 here in the UK, and you'll see them somewhere around the $500 mark in the US. So it's not the cheapest bass on the market, but it is in the lower budget range and perfect for those looking to get a good solid starter bass. I'd compare the build and feel of the regular long scale Sires to the vintage mod range by Squire, which are also great basses at that price point. So this U5 has a maple neck, maple fingerboard and alder body. It's lightweight as you'd expect, but still feels nice and solid. The radius is 9.5 inches, so it's more like a later jazz bass feel in the fretboard, unlike the more curved 7.25 inch of my Marcus Miller Fender bass. The neck is nice and comfy with a common C profile, and it's got a really nice smooth satin feel on the back. The bridge is a Marcus Miller vintage S style, and this is very similar to the bridge on my old vintage Fenders, especially with regard to the saddles, but it also has the option of both through body and front loading of the strings. It came as stock with traditional front loading through the bridge, but I've since switched to through body. Through body tends to give a warmer tone with more sustain and a steeper break over the saddles, and through the bridge tends to give a more punchy tone. Either way, they both work well on this bass. It's just a matter of taste. The pickups are in a PJ configuration, and these are the Marcus Super PJ Revolution set. It's all passive, and in terms of controls, we have neck and bridge volumes there and a single master tone. All very traditional and easy for beginners to work out, and I'll give you a taste of both pickups in a second. Lastly, from a pure looks perspective, I think this is a great looking bass. There are 3 colours to choose from: natural, mint green, and this tobacco sunburst. It's a great finish, and I love this binding effect that you get around the edge. So like I said earlier, short scale basses can sometimes look a little odd and toy-like, but this bass has a really cool professional vibe going on. I could use this on stage, without feeling like I'm playing something that I've bought as a Christmas present for my 6-year-old daughter. The only things that I would say I'm not that keen on are the headstock and the look of the neck. I'm not too keen on the angular shape of that headstock, and Sires suffer a little from the same thing that I find in the Sire vintage mods, whereby the finish ends up looking a little plastic. It's a personal taste thing though, and that shouldn't be any reason not to buy one. I also love the Sire vintage mod range and recommend them every chance that I get, but I still feel the same about that cheap plastic look and feel in the neck and the headstock. So, onto the sound. So let's first have a listen with both pickups and tone control up full. So. If I solo the neck pickup, we get more of that precision vibe. If I solo the bridge pickup, then we get more of that mid-heavy Fender jazz kind of sound. And considering that this bass has Marcus Miller's name attached to it, let's have a listen to how it sounds with a little bit of slap bass technique. So, is it worth buying the Sire U5 short scale bass? Well, yes, if you want a short scale bass, this is a great buy. I'm not a short scale consumer by any stretch of the imagination, but I have to say I like playing this bass. It's easy on the hands for sure, but even if your hand size isn't an issue, these Sires are nice basses to play, especially if you're getting started out. They're pretty cheap, built really well, and sound great. Some people find that short scale basses to be a little bit boomy, and yes, when you solo that neck pickup, it does have a touch of that boom compared to a regular P bass, but it's not that big a deal and not the kind of thing that many players are even going to notice. So let me just finish with a few pros and cons that you have to be aware of when buying a short scale bass. In terms of the pros, the most obvious is the smaller spacing between each fret, so you can get stretches that you might not be able to attain on regular long scale basses. So even really large stretch licks, like the typical, all that kind of stuff, it's a lot easier. You can see how far I can actually get the hand to stretch on this. And, typical large arpeggio moves, a lot easier. And even the infamous harmonic from Portrait of Tracy, where you hold down the B and catch that 6th fret, even that is a doddle on here. Obviously, they're all examples of very large stretches, even for regular size hands. So smaller stretches, like you might find in a regular, minor scale there, the 1 fret per 1 finger per fret kind of thing, you're going to find that a lot easier, even if you are a beginner or you have very small hands or perhaps injuries. So I'd say that that's the main benefit, but there are also cons to playing a short scale. So first of all, there's a little less choice when it comes to strings. I've just restrung this bass with Ernie Ball regular gauge strings, but there's not exactly a huge range to choose from. Many of the short scale packs are flat wounds, and there are quite a few nickel packs as well, but when it comes to stainless steel round wounds, you'll just have to go with what you find available. They're a lot less common, so expect them to be out of stock quite a bit. The other main con is the lack of string tension. The strings here are noticeably more loose. You can really bend them there. And it's just one of those things that you have to get used to. Because of that lack of tension, you might find that you have to be more on point technically, because it's so much easier to bend the strings slightly out of tune, if you're pushing down hard. For more experienced players, that's going to be less of a problem because the technique's going to be much better and the fingering's going to be more stable and accurate. But less experienced players might run into a few problems. you know, it's only the same problem that you're going to get on a long scale bass, but it just becomes more obvious when there's less string tension there. So just remember to lighten up on your playing to compensate and focus on holding the string in place. Don't bend it. Okay, so that's short scale basses and the Sire U5. As always, please like, comment, subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on the weekly lessons from Talking Bass, and I'll see you next week.